I had convinced myself that the first corrective filing would be banal. That was the funny thing about the bureau. Its miracles loved to masquerade as ordinary chores. I believed, with an intern's stubborn superstition, that if I performed the right sub-rituals, fold the corners exactly twice, hum the allotted bureaucratic jingle under my breath, align the stamped square with the bottom right cipher, then the world would obediently do what it had always done, be tidy. I had not expected Registrar Amy to smile at me the way she did when she accepted the stack of reissued Form 42Bs. Her smile was the kind a librarian gives a child who has discovered a secret index. It was modest and grave, and full of the comfort of someone who moves through paper the way some people move through air. I felt my palms damp under the blazer that belonged to someone older, perhaps to an aunt who used it as a curtain during a heat wave. The blazer swallowed my shoulders. My badge scraped the ledger's stitch on Ledger's coat as I passed in the doorway, and she looked up with the expression of someone who reads ledgers like homilies. "Make it banal," Shed said. "Make it ordinary. None of us need another Wednesday in the news." So banal I would be, I thought. I would be a model intern, a small, unremarkable cog in the great, oddly hissing machine of continuity. I would not be the person who made Tuesday fall into last Thursday. Still, rituals have details, and details are where disasters hide. Owen leaned against the translator cabinet like a tired punctuation mark and grinned in a way that suggested he had lost nothing of his appetite for joke or danger. He removed the smudged index card from behind his ear, as if that might clear the fog between his ears. "Ink is a jealous thing," he said, pushing a cup of office coffee my way. He never drank it. The coffee was a prop. It remembers where it ought to go. It resents being told otherwise. I unfolded the instructions for the corrective Form 42B like a prayer leaf. They were both meticulous and almost indecently small in print. Form 42B asked politely for a date of misplacement, a list of altered items, the signature of an on-duty supervisor, and for reasons I later learned were both tradition and talisman, the precise circumference of the signature loop. There was a line for witness and another that read staple with left-handed motion. I had written my apologies to the staplers on the back of the sheet and filed them under maybe. The staplers were not yet offended enough to take legal action. We set ourselves to the ritual in the corridor by the filing cabinets because space and ceremony go together. The air smelled as usual of toner and distant thunder, a phrase I would tuck away and unfurl in quiet moments like a lucky coin. Registrar Amy arranged the forms into a neat fan mise. Ledger hovered, fingers in the pockets of her many-pocketed suit. I liked to think the pockets were pockets for possibility, and Harmon sent a mo in the form of a calendar page that shivered of its own volition. Dot, who was not properly allowed in corridors but had crawled out through a crack in the ledger, sat on the edge of the table like a folded thought and took occasional interest by twitching an ear that was a corner of paper. "Remember the loopms," Ledger said. "The loop must say yes and then not mean it too loudly." "Owen," I said, "how loudly should it not mean it?" Owen made a circle with his thumb and forefinger and knocked it on the table so it made a small, ceremonious sound. "Like that," he said. "Not too loud, not especially enthusiastic, but with no traces of resentment. Resentment is a bad ink." Registrar Amy dipped the seal. The stamp breathed a sigh as the ink caught. The motion was strangely intimate, like the creak of a ship that still trusted the sea. She kissed the rubber pad, the way old operatives kissed the brass on the vault to ask it permission. Then she brought it down upon the first form. The sound was wrong, not because it was loud, but because it had an undertone of backward wind, like a clock that had remembered it could rewind. For half a second the fluorescent lights seemed to flicker with approval, and then, small as a hiccup and vast as an earthquake, an intern on the second floor greeted his supervisor with a "Good morning, sir," only to be told, politely and with the memory of retirement, that that was not the right day to be saying that. "That's not right, Ms. Ledger said. "It's ink," Owen said cheerfully, and then went pale in a way that did not suit him. He always turned pale like a man whose joke had been given the floor to become real. "You should understand that inside the bureau, time is not one thing. It is a stack of papers, a layered filing cabinet, a system of labels and glues, and the smallest misapplication of authority can allow days to slip sideways like bad postcards. For us, stamps were the screws that kept the day together. A distorted screw makes the whole shelf wobble. The first trimmer was comic. A woman 3 offices down returned from lunch with 2 soups in hand and set one down as if she had intended it for someone who had not yet ordered it. Across the hall, a security memo addressed to a Mr. Jenkins appeared on the mid-hour. Jenkins' desk with the ink still wet, then, as if embarrassed by its own presumption, yanked itself back into the printer. "Ha," Registrar Amy said. "Weird." Backward echo. She smoothed her hands as if smoothing paper, and I could see in her face the quiet spark that told me she had done this before, or something very like it. I began to sweat. The blazer kept the sweat in, like a kind, oppressive heat. I hummed the jingle that Ms. Ledger had taught me to steady my breathing. It is a thin little bureaucratic tune that a person hums when she wants the world to be reasonable. We pressed on. There were, after all, procedures. Procedures are like spells in that they contain logic, repetition, and the possibility of being recited wrong. Registrar Amy restamped the next form, Ms. Ledger signed where the ledger stitch suggested she sign, and Owen produced very quietly a little strip of adhesive with a printed motto, "Do not overcorrect." We followed the steps, we looped the signatures politely. We stapled the ceremonial 3 staples in left-handed motion. I kept my apologies to the staplers warm in my pocket. Ate the corner of a marginal note and left a small and perfectly useful ellipses behind, like a breadcrumb. And then the misprint in the corner of the supply of reissued Form 42Bs showed itself to be a temptation. It was small and accidental, an error in the print run. Instead of the code for Tuesday we had, somewhere in the margin, "Tooth overlap see appendix." It was a printer's note that had been meant for the pressman, not the clerks, and it read like a stage direction where no stage existed. Registrar Amy's stamp hesitated. Ink is jealous. Remember, it can smell indecision. A hesitation is a scent to it. The stamp came down. The sound this time was a bell. It was a bell with a missing clapper. It rang wrong, and the wrongness spread. An entire Tuesday, small, unassuming, full of coffee, and the kind of petty errands Tuesdays have always excelled at, folded itself like paper and slipped into the filet of last Thursday. The effect was not immediate and dramatic, as one might imagine in a lesser story. It was human. It was a child pressing his face against the aquarium, discovering a fish that looked like a clock. It was 2 office workers, both answering their telephones in a cadence that said they were speaking to Mondays. It was also more. The building's clocks began to argue amongst themselves, ticking at different polite rates. And a memo that had been filed under civic hats found itself cross-referenced under marine life. "Oh no," I said, because I had to say something. Oh no, that felt like the right thing in the moment. "Weird Ms. Ledger said with an authority that tried to make weird a sufficient explanation. She folded her hands. Her fingers were calm. Her ledger-stitched coat rustled like a solemn seaweed. "We need to reverse it," Owen said, and his voice had a small tremor under the bravado. He always sounded resourceful. It was one of his more attractive faults. "We follow procedure again," Registrar Amy murmured. We file back into order." So we did what the bored and heroic do. We doubled down on ritual to fix the very ritual that had cheated us. There is a certain arithmetic to panic. Double the prayer, triple the signatures. If one stamp misbehaves, you bring 3 more to court. It works sometimes. It fails spectacularly in other times, and I now had to learn the exact difference by living through one of the failing moments. The office dissolved into a chorus of clerical murmurs. Telephone calls overlapped with conversations that had happened yesterday, or might yet happen tomorrow. and the fluorescent lights held steady as only bureaucratic lights can hold steady, indifferent and expectant. An intern in a sweater 2 offices down Martin, I think his name was, came into my corridor and found an older version of me's ledger, giving him a stern, retired glance and telling him delicately that had not yet been allowed to bring up the issue. He looked at me as if I had arranged this theatrical confusion deliberately. "Is this part of orientation?" he asked, candid and terrified. He asked it in a voice that came from last Thursday. "No," I said, foolishly adding, "not normally." I will try now to describe what panic does inside a person who thinks of themselves as a filing clerk. Panic does not explode. Panic files itself into every crevice of your mental cabinets. It writes urgent on your memory. It stamps your chest. It sets an unnecessary stack of printouts in front of you and expects you to find the correct subclause under which to productively tremble. Owen took the stapler from me at some point, I'm not sure when, and he pressed an old tie into the heart of the stack of corrected forms, as if giving it an offering. "Staple with intention," he said, and it was the kind of thing you can only say when the world is uncertain and you must insist it is not. We attempted the correction again. Registrar Amy, with the calm of a heart surgeon and the hands of a stamp artist, applied the seals one by one. Mies. Ledger supplied signatures like sacraments. Dot offered a marginal shrug. I held the corner of the ledger and tried to breathe with the measured cadence of a person who files their breath in triplicate. This time, the seal did not make the wrong sound. It made a hopeful, timid sound. For a single elongated moment, I allowed myself to believe in the miracle of procedure. The office exhaled. Someone laughed, nervous and then embarrassed. It was not to hold. A coffee arrived in the corridor before it had been ordered. It materialized on a saucer with a polite note, "For someone who will need it later." The coffee was hot. The person who would later get it wandered by and accepted it as if nothing were unusual. I watched the steam and wondered if coffee had always had prophets. The misapplied correction had not been corrected. It had been compounded. The reissued forms, in a kind of bureaucratic empathy, decided to take the next step themselves. Instead of nudging Tuesday back to its rightful shelf, they drew Tuesday deeper into the geometry of Thursday. Whole conversations layered atop one another. A live feed in the break room showed a ribbon-cutting ceremony in which the mayor's hat, the mayor who was now, for reasons I wished no one to dig into, wearing a small lobster, wobbled and the crowd applauded with 2 different rhythms at once. "We've made it worse," I said, because saying a fact out loud is the first form of apology. "You filed the right thing wrong, Mies," Ledger said. There was compassion under her severity, the way someone pats a burned pan to cool it down. "My fault," I said. It was easier to make it my fault than to admit that the world had become a college of fragile agreements. It felt, for an intern, like an honest defense. If the intern did the thing, the intern can also fix the thing. But the Bureau is not an instrument of solitary labor. It is a system of negotiated acts, and each act has witnesses and countersigns. Registrar Amy, with a small, secret smile that said she liked me more than she had yesterday, produced a roll of adhesive tape printed, with the words "Reissue at dawn," that she had been hoarding for a moment like this. We wrapped the edges of the forms. We muttered the proper apologies to the staplers. Owen whispered a joke about archivists being the only people who could buy silence in bulk. The cascading consequences were both comic and cruel. A retired copy of Mir Pockets, who collects lost things, walked into a locker and left only to reappear with half a dozen umbrellas that none of us remembered losing. Mail that had been properly stamped in a Tuesday smooth hand folded itself into letters that now read like polite riddles. A complaint about the lobster hat was logged under culinary accessories and municipal missteps for reasons no one could quite pass without a cup of Mabel's soup. At one point I apologized to a stapler. I wrote the apology down on a scrap and intended to file it under maybe. I could not tell you whether the stapler felt merciful. It made a small metallic sigh when I spoke. Perhaps it was pleased. Perhaps it was befuddled. The difference, I learned, between mechanical beings and human beings in the bureau is that the mechanical beings do not gossip. By the time the day had grown slippery and the office felt like a box of photographs in which some had been shuffled mies, Ledger called us to the small conference room that smelled faintly of dust and the memory of decisions. She set her ledger on the table like a judge placing a palm on scripture. She looked at each of us and said, simply, "We will try again, and we will be more careful, but we will not do it alone." Owen nodded and produced, as if he had been waiting for this permission his whole life, a pocketful of improbable stamps, one with a sailor, one with a small dog, another with an eye that winked when you pressed it. He passed them out with the solemnity of a man who knows how to make a joke into a bribe. "For morale," he said. Dot crept up the ledger's spine and left a marginal note that smelled faintly of almond and mischief. It was, as far as Dot was concerned, the closest thing to a treaty. We pinned our hopes to one formula: meticulous, witnessed, correct. Each person would sign. Each person would countersign. The moral weight of the signatures would make up for the arrogant inexactness of a printer's note. We would refile the misfile, shut the book, and send Tuesday back to its quiet, necessary tasks. It was, therefore, a particular horror when the final restamping produced a sound like a sigh, and then a small, impossible sound like someone closing a book that had never been opened before. The effect was quieter than thunder. The world rearranged itself delicately, like a hand tidying a mantle. I supposed that was worse. I think, Ledger said slowly, that a piece of Tuesday will have to be recatalogued. Owen. Harmon asked, and his voice had the stern honey a choir gives to a hymn. Owen's face folded in on itself like a page. He looked as if he had swallowed a memory he did not wish to lose. "I have an old file," he said. "I've been saving it. If we staple it to the ledger, if I hand it over to be formally recorded maybe Tuesday, we'll find the right shelf again." We looked at the file. It was a thin thing with a coffee stain like a map. Owen's face when he opened it was the face of someone mourning a joke he could not tell without betraying the smile. I wanted to tell him that I was sorry. I wanted to tell him that I had been trying to be banal. I wanted to tell him that 1,000 small apologies lived in my blazer pockets. But words were like forms that needed signatures, and I had not yet learned to sign everything I felt. We stapled the file into the ledger. The staple was small, and the ceremony modest. Owen placed his hands over it, then let them fall. There was a small pressure, like a hand on the back of your neck saying, "Do this." I felt the ledger's spine like an animal preparing to sleep. The next thing I remember is the office sighing into itself. The overlapping hum of days smoothed, not like iron, but like a bed being made when someone has remembered a missing pillow. Tuesday did not return to its exact former shape. It kept a stubborn souvenir, a coffee that insisted on arrival at odd hours and the knowledge, intimate and slightly scandalous, that hats have tastes. The lobster hat remained in the news for a few days, charmingly unrepentant. I learned from that day, as I learned from many small painful and comic incidents afterwards, that bureaucracy is a species of faith. We believe the ritual will hold because it has held before. We hold because someone must hold. We staple apologies into ledgers because we like the noise they make. And I learned, too, the thing I had not expected, that procedures can be wrong in the right way. When Owen stapled his file into the ledger, he did not just give up a curiosity. He offered a concession. The world, grateful and perverse, accepted it. In return, it allowed us to wear our days again without too much embarrassment. When the rush slowed and the elevator's doors closed with the soft, bureaucratic thud they always make, I sat in the third-floor corridor and wrote an apology to the staplers that was longer than the first. This one I put under maybe and addressed it to all mechanical participants. I left it there because sometimes you must be both honest and theatrical with inanimate things. The moral of that day was not a tidy one. The fix did not restore everything to a clean page. Real living is messy, so is real filing. Some things, once displaced, prefer to remain small wanderers. They are kinder that way. By late afternoon, Registrar Amy had resumed her work with the quiet patience of a woman who knows stamps of moods, me's. Ledger waved her hands and rearranged a crease in her worry. Owen smoked a cigarette that tasted of metaphor and put it out in a jar labeled for future use. Dot left a marginal note that simply read, "You tried." I left the office with my blazer feeling less like a costume and more like a skin that had been stretched in the act of growing. I had been an intern who misfiled the world once, and that was a proper embarrassment. But it was also a beginning. And if you ask whether I learned how to avoid making Tuesday tumble into last Thursday forever after, I will tell you two truths. The first is, no, I did not. Mistakes are a stubborn, attractive force. The second is, sometimes when a day slips, letting it keep a small, humane error is better than returning it to a bland perfection. It keeps the world from being a perfectly ironed sheet of time. It keeps it warm. As I walked home that evening, the city felt like paper with a few pages slightly dog-eared. I liked it. I hummed the bureaucratic jingle me's. Ledger had shown me and felt something in its rhythm. Not order, not chaos, but a kind of negotiated peace. The lobster hat passed in a newsfeed somewhere, noble and absurd. I thought, privately, ridiculous thoughts, that staplers perhaps kept grudges, that ledgers slept with their pages open to dream of marginal notes, that Dot might, one day, write its name in full. I also thought, less privately, that if I had a single regret, it would be that I had not known sooner how willing people were to sign their names on little acts of kindness. The hook of that night, and the thing that made me both more nervous and oddly pleased for the future, was the knowledge that somewhere, in some stack of forms, another misprint waited. Not because the Bureau was careless, far from it, but because the world resists being fully catalogued. It seems to prefer being partly a mystery. And I, a former fan of tidy schedules, had an awful, growing fondness for that preference. When I reached my building, my sandwich, a humble companion from that morning, remembered, in the precise and indignant voice that only sandwiches possess at the Bureau, that it had once been a library card. I apologized. The sandwich seemed mollified. There are worse fates than a sandwich that has had an interesting life. I slept badly, which is to say I slept as all people who have touched the Bureau sleep, with the awareness that laws can be amended and the hum of the ledger in the corner of the mind. The next morning I returned to the office with a new phrase in my head: we do not overcorrect. It is a phrase I have kept like a coin. It has been useful. It has been, in the end, the difference between a world that is merely tidy and a world that retains the small, stubborn beating heart of error. We would, in the afternoon, attempt other fixes. There would be more stamps and more graceful failures. We would learn other things about signatures that must be willed, about the diplomacy of crumbs left by the slip, and about the taste of Mabel's soup when you need an answer and not a sentence. But those are things for later entries, and I am an intern with a ledger full of apologies. For now, understand this: I filed the wrong form in the right way, or perhaps the right form in the wrong way. The consequence was not merely a lesson in stamping. It was an initiation into the Bureau's theology, that paperwork is not a straitjacket but a conversation. And conversations, like staplers and sandwiches, have their own tempers and forgiving days. The next time I touched a stamp, it felt like touching a small god, apologetic and possibly in need of coffee. At lunch, as the clocks bickered and the break room radio played a song that sounded suspiciously like the Bureau's jingle, I found myself watching the door and wondering which small error we would decide to keep. The choice is always waiting at noon, like a plate of soup that will tell you the weather if you listen. And if you want a cliffhanger, when I returned from lunch that day, someone had placed a tiny lobster shell on my desk with a sticky note that read, in careful block letters for future mayoral hats. Do not over-iron. I did not know who had left it. I wondered if I should file it under maybe or always. Either answer would make sense. Either answer would be bureaucratically defensible. I had, by then, learned that not all correctness is virtue and not all error is sin. Some mistakes are just invitations. The question was whether we had the courage to accept them. I learned early in my mother's ledger-lined kitchen that one can apologize into being forgiven if one uses the right heading. Sorry on a post-it, properly folded, can overcome many transgressions. It was unfortunate training for the bureau, where apologies are typed on watermark paper and filed under remediation emotional. Still, habits die slowly. In the microfilm alcove, with toner smudges on my fingertips and a box of sticky notes rustling on my lap, I found myself rehearsing an apology to a creature that liked pastry. "Are you sure about this?" Owen asked, leaning in the doorway like a man who had seen too many metaphors staked with real staples. "It is a pastry. If it eats margins, what will it do with custard?" I held the pastry like a white flag. It was a small, unassuming affair from Mabel's side table, an almond croissant she had set down while ladling prophecy into someone's bowl. The pastry smelled of butter and fortitude, it seemed to me, to embody the precise, compromisable joy the bureau had spent the morning arguing over. Dot was smaller than I expected, no larger than a folded memo, and she had, if a sprite can be assigned a gender, a voice like 3 ellipses spoken at once. She perched on the corner of a ledger like a punctuation mark that had decided to stand up. Her skin was paper-thin, a mottled collage of coffee stains and margins, and when she blinked it was with the slow blink of a rubber stamp coming down. I had practiced for this, mostly practiced not looking foolish. When one must convince a marginal creature of anything, the danger is that one will become marginal oneself. "Pastry," Dot said, and by said I mean she moved 3 little dots like beetles across a page, and the room seemed to interpret them as an offering. "Pastry," I said. "From Mabel it is warm. It has, I can't promise exactly the correct amount of jam. But it will bring you joy, and filings. You get filings too. We will feed you margins, real, fresh margin, with your permission." Dots shuffled. I imagine it as a fidget, but I think sprites read theatrical honesty in ways humans do not. Dot extended a finger-like corner, pinched a crumb that could have been a comma, and nibbled. The sound was papery and absurdly intimate. Owen watched with the half-grin of a man who knows more words for improbable than the average person. "You always bribe sprites with baked goods?" he asked. "Not always," I said. "Sometimes I bribe them with sticky notes. Pastries work better for first impressions." Dot swallowed and left a small line of ink in the air, as if she had sniffed and then decided to sneeze punctuation. The air filled with the smell of warm sugar and toner, a scent I had by now learned to associate with hope, with paperwork's tiny, ridiculous miracles. "What do you want?" I asked, in the formal way Mies' ledger had taught me when we negotiated a stamp shortage, precisely, politely, and with the acceptance that the answer might be elliptical. Dot made a set of dots that looked like a question mark and then scrawled on the edge of a nearby form 42BM, ARG in. I took it easy, read that again for me out loud, if you can. Dot annoyed at me by scribbling a little flourish that could have been a laugh. Then, in her own paper-rustling fashion, she produced a marginal note, a corner of handwriting in a midnight ink I had never seen inside bureau walls. The note was not typed, it was not neat. It looked, disturbingly and thrillingly, like a thought scrawled when someone looked away from a form and allowed a private opinion to leak into the margin. "This is forbidden," I whispered. "Forbidden, yes, but it belongs to the file, which makes it procedural property." "We are within our rights," Owen said, always the charming anarchist when it came to semantics. "Besides," he added, and leaned close so his breath smelled faintly of questionable office coffee, "we're in the business of talking to forbidden things." I unfolded the marginal note with a reverence I had once reserved for library books and the last good donut in a break room. The handwriting, if I can call it that, was a curving, slightly impatient script. It read, "I do not like being smoothed. I prefer edges. I am not a mistake." The signature, if that little slant constituted one, was a tiny smudge that may or may not have resembled a face. For slip, I asked. Dot made 3 dots that meant, as far as I could tell, yes, but also maybe, and don't say its name too loudly. I had not expected a note to be an argument. Bureau work tended toward the sedate, forms countersigned, filed away like sleeping animals. But here was a sentence with aspiration. It argued for its right to be not overseen or corrected, but acknowledged. It wanted edge. It preferred to be present rather than politely eliminated. It has personality, Amy said softly. She had arrived without my realizing. Registrars have the uncanny ability to appear like commas at the ends of sentences. She hovered with a stack of stamps in one hand and a tiny, conspiratorial smile. There is a kind of honesty in the way certain people love stamps. Their enthusiasm resembles religious devotion. It says it prefers edges. That sounds like an agenda or a philosophy, Owen offered. I felt my throat tighten. If the misfile had the rudimentary capacity to sign its thoughts, then my misplacement of Form 42B was more than a clerical hiccup. It was contact with something that believed in itself, that meant compassion. It meant negotiation. It meant I could no longer fully hide behind policy. "We have to be careful, Mies," Ledger would have said, had she been there. I could hear the rustle of her coat, the soft stamp of Ledgered authority. Instead, I had as company a pastry, a file sprite, and a woman whose smile made the bureau stamp closets suddenly seem domestic. Meh. Pockets found us then, as if he had been waiting in a pocket for the right time to emerge. He unrolled from a shadow like a carpet and opened his pockets the way one opens a drawer, slowly, methodically, with the confidence of a man who truly knows the geography of loss. "Got something for you," he said in a voice like paper being turned. He clawed into one of his pouches and pulled out a small object wrapped in a handkerchief that reeked faintly of rain and yesterday. He unwrapped it like a magician. There was a small umbrella, the kind meant for a child's hand, chipped paint on the handle, a fray of ribbon like the end of a story. The umbrella hummed very softly, as if it remembered every drizzle and porch argument it had ever sheltered. "It remembers being a promise," Mr. Pockets said. "Not mine. Picked it up outside a courthouse where someone promised to come back. It couldn't keep the promise, so it kept the weather." The umbrella clicked open. Inside, the fabric was stitched with a faint pattern of dates that did not match any calendar I owned. When I touched the metal ribs, they thrummed not with electricity but with recognition, the way a tape recorder hums when it knows the song that's coming. Amy looked at the umbrella like a reader encountering a beloved footnote. "If this likes rain, it could be used to lure the slip," she said, practical and precise. "The slip likes things that remember being wronged. It likes edges," Dot murmured, as if confirming what the marginal note had already claimed. "Edges. Are we luring a creature with the memory of a promise?" I asked, thinking of all the promises I had ever made, and how many were folded like bad directions in my blazer pocket. "We are negotiating," Owen said. "We will not trap so much as invite it for tea." Tea, I was beginning to understand, was a form of diplomacy at the Bureau. You could staple a memo and demand signatures, but if you wanted a soul to speak honestly about itself, you offered warmth and something sweet. Mabel's soups and pastries had brokered more truces than the Council of Continuity ever had. The umbrella hummed in my hands, and I felt suddenly foolish for the smallness of the apology notes I had written to staplers. There was an echo inside that hum, a small loop of memory that sounded suspiciously like a child's laugh. "You think it will help?" I asked Amy. She smiled in the way one smiles when one wants to be fierce and kind at once. "I think every object with a memory is an argument you can bring to the table," she said. "You read the marginal, feed the sprite, and you present the umbrella. You offer the slip a seat and the chance to speak." We sat then, Dot on the ledger, the umbrella folded but warm. The pastry crumbs arranged like constellations on my palm and began a small ritual that was equal parts ridiculous and sacred. Owen cleared his throat and, with the solemnity of a man reciting an office memo, said, "By the authority vested in us, by the Department of Improbable Excuses and their Bureau, we invite any marginal entity who is willing to speak to the nature of its existence to come to us. We offer tea, pastry, and a promise to listen." Everything about that sentence was both true and a lie. We had no right to promise, and yet the Bureau had always operated on a currency of intentions as much as ink. A stamp could be a legal instrument, but a promise, especially one delivered with dessert, could be persuasive. The lights dimmed without anyone turning a switch. The microfilm machine sighed like an old animal. Somewhere in the stacks, something shifted shelves, exhaling like boxes in a basement, and dots shivered in excitement. At first, nothing happened. Then a question mark showed up in the margin near the note's edge, as if someone had poked their head up from under the page. The ink was wet with possibility. A small smudge that could have been a face smiled a little. If a smudge can smile, it was both relieved and affronted. "You speak in crumbs and italics," the slip said, and the voice resembled the sound of a pen uncapping. I almost dropped the umbrella. "We wanted to talk," I said, which was the truth and also the understatement of my life. "Talk. People always talk," the slip replied. "They reach their fingers into my margins and pull me like a loose thread. They smooth me, they burn me. You put pastry where my mouth might be. Unusual." "We misfiled a set of forms," Owen said, stepping forward despite himself. "It was unintentional. We are trying to put things back. We didn't mean to make me tasteful," the slip finished. "I like taste. I like inconvenience. I like the way a bad hat becomes better with a lobster. I like the way a surprising rain remembers you on a day you need it. You want me to vanish, or you want me to be neat. Why?" The question was ancient and fresh. It had the weight of a complaint and the sharpness of a child asking why leaves fall. If I had an answer, it would have been a policy pamphlet: continuity, safety, the prevention of mass panic. Instead, I found, as often happens in the middle of a crisis, that I had my mother's instinct to file and my own surprising affection for messy things. "Because people need predictability," I said. "Because when days tumble into each other, people get lost, they forget dinners, anniversaries, they owe money twice. They cannot plan funerals." The sentence came out as a jumble of practicalities and fear. We fix things so lives can be lived with fewer rude interruptions. And I say predictable lives, lived like on rails, are not the only lives worth wanting, the slip said. And in that voice I heard all of the scraped amendments that had once been flung into the basements. "I like when you trip over a kindness. I like when your sandwich remembers being someone else, and then apologizes. The world that chooses always to iron out its edges is a world that will never be surprised into happiness." It was an argument. It was a defense. It also sounded a little bit like the reasons I kept sticky notes labeled maybe on my desk. Amy shifted her weight and did that thing clerks do when they file a decision quietly. She stamped the air next to her heart. "We do not want to erase surprise. We want to prevent harm," she said. "Can't you agree that some edges are gentle? Some edges," the slip conceded, "are knives. Some edges are stars. I cannot tell them apart without experimenting." It made a face that could have been a smile or a grimace. We argued then, in sentences full of forms and metaphors, and I discovered that negotiation with a smudge required grammatical discipline, no grand gestures, no impossible promises. The bureaucratic language I had been taught precise, conditional, with plenty of room for caveats was oddly the best diplomacy when the other party was ink-born and inclined to whimsy. Dot fed Dot's own crumbs into the argument like a chorus of punctuation. Meh. Pockets twirled the umbrella handle between his fingers and produced from within its canopy a single bead of rain that remembered a lullaby. Owen made jokes about stapling metaphors which helped because the slip laughed at them. Laughter, I learned, lubricates signatures better than any stamp. At last, after what felt like half an hour and 3 coffees, we reached something resembling a treaty. We would reseal the misfile in major ways, nothing that threatened to erase people's basic histories or their obligations, but we would leave a curated list of benevolent anomalies. The lobster companion for the mayor, rain that fell only on certain sorts of sad days, a sandwich that occasionally remembered someone kinder. We wrote the list down in a formal-looking requisition that in the light of the microfilm room looked, absurdly, like marriage vows. The slip read the list. It shifted in the margin like a creature lounging, pleased to find exceptions where it had expected only erasures. When we asked what it would like in return, it asked for a small thing, a place to put my notes, a shelf of margins where I can leave myself comments, an agreement that you will read them once in a while. I imagined a shelf in the bureau, full of marginalia post-its, doodles, complaints, occasional sonnets. It seemed improbable and possibly criminal, but also tender. Agreed, I said, perhaps too quickly. But the truth was that I had already been keeping a little folder of maybe on my desk. Making room for the slip's notes felt like making room for the parts of life you could not plan for. We formalized it with a ridiculous signature ritual. Dot drew 3 ellipses. Owen put his smudged index card behind his ear and stapled the corner of the requisition to a page of his old memos. Pockets pressed the umbrella's handle into the page like a seal. Amy signed with a flourish that made the ink smell faintly of lavender and bureaucracy. For a moment it felt like a victory. The microfilm machine hummed in approval. The pastry was mostly gone. Dot curled against the ledger like a comma that had finally found its sentence. Then Amy touched my sleeve and, quietly, asked the question that made all of it suddenly fragile. If we keep the good mistakes, would we lose anything else in the bargain? I thought of the week that had been tumbled, of forgotten phone calls and mismatched birthdays, and the intern who had greeted a retired version of their supervisor. My throat tightened with responsibility and with an aching selfishness. I had wanted to fix things, to show M's ledger that I could hold lines, but somewhere between pastry and signature I had learned how to like a world with a few well-placed edges. I don't know, I said, but I'm going to try not to lose anything important. She smiled, not entirely reassured, and I wondered if our tiny, awkward warmth would survive the noon decision. The umbrella hummed in the corner like a clock, and somewhere below us, a shelf breathed as paperwork settled into new shapes. When we left the microfilm alcove, the library of filing rooms seemed a touch kinder, as if it had been given a secret. Meh. Pockets walked slightly taller, the umbrella tucked under his arm. Dot collected crumbs and filed them under possibilities. Owen made one more joke about stapling metaphors into future memos. Amy and I traded the sort of look people trade when they have shared a risk and a laugh. I wanted, in that sudden hush before lunchtimes resumed their rituals, to believe that the bureau could be both tidy and a little wild. We carried with us, like talismans, pastry, crumbs, and a fragile marginal note that insisted on its own right to exist. It is one thing to make policy for the masses. It is another to promise a smudge a shelf. I had made that awkward promise, with pastry and stamps, and the naive conviction of someone who still believed in apologies. By the time we reached the stairwell, Sally, the elevator operator, was humming something in a minor key that suggested she knew precisely which buttons to avoid. The building smelled of toner and distant thunder, but it also smelled faintly of almond and rain. I held Amy's gaze for a second longer than good sense dictated, and she smiled in a secret way that could be filed under maybe. We had a plan, a pastry, and an umbrella that kept remembering what rain felt like. The marginal note was tucked safely in my pocket. The slip had offered an argument that I had not expected to respect, and I had, in turn, agreed to read its letters. As we descended toward the main floors, the stacks behind us rustled like a library of living things. I felt, absurdly and completely, that we had not only made an ally but had made the bureau itself a little more human. The next step was to map the missing moments between floors' timelines, stairs and elevators that ran on different rules. Sally would help. She would know which buttons to press twice for lost weekdays. I put my hand on the banister and felt the cold of the metal, and for the first time since the misfile, I did not want to fix everything into neatness. I wanted instead to file the right things in the right places and leave an extra pocket labeled possible. Downstairs, the elevator smelled faintly of mint and old pages. The doors sighed open on floors that kept their own calendars. We stepped in, carrying our unlikely treaty. Outside, time kept its teeth. Inside the bureau, we had just promised an ink-streaked smudge a shelf, and with it, a small kind of mercy. The hook, as Mem's Ledger would say, was this: the bureau can negotiate, but it must also walk the walk to lunchtime where paper meets the sun. If we had convinced the slip to accept our small terms, would the temporal flaws agree? Would the elevator ride be smooth, or would we press the wrong button and find Tuesday at the bottom of the shaft? I could not know. But I had a marginal note in my pocket and a pastry stain on my tie, and those seemed like good things to hold on to when the clocks began to sing.